um, are you not working anymore?
Existentially, it's an open question. Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. This is the General Government Committee. We are convening at 8 a.m. As always, first order of business after we call to order is roll call. All council members are present and accounted for. Councilmember Joe Cathy, Councilmember Leanna Dahlhoff, and myself, Councilmember Michael Altauser. First order of business, substantive business is approval of the minutes from our May 14th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion by Councilmember Dahlhoff and seconded by Councilmember Cathy. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. That brings us to our substantive agenda. Well, before we get there, there will be one addition to item number 8, additional items where we discuss meeting times for the committee moving forward. But before we get there, item number 4 on the agenda is regarding the service provider agreement with the Artisans Group for the update of the accessory dwelling unit plans. Brad, I think you'll help us walk through that this morning.
Yes, there are 2 related items in the first part of your agenda related to the update of the accessory dwelling unit plans. One is a service provider agreement with the Artisan Group, and the second is an interlocal agreement with Olympia, Lacey, and Yelm. The reason it's coming to you both together is that we have sort of internally worked out between the jurisdictions that we will take the lead in managing the contract. And so that's why we've sort of made the changes and adjustments to this. The request for the General Government Committee is that you place both this agreement on the June 17 City Council consent calendar for approval. The purpose also of, again, of the accessory dwelling unit plans is for us to basically provide approved stock plans to the public for people wanting to build accessory dwelling units. Artisan Group is going to be updating their current set of plans that we're using to reflect the new requirements for 1,000 square foot ADUs, as well as energy code, as well as potentially adding a couple additional options to the 4 sets that we currently have.
My only question is, like, we have different requirements than Lacey and Olympia in terms of what ADUs can look like and feel like in terms of square footage, right? Like
currently we do, we're all moving in the same direction. And actually the intent really of these plans is to work with all the codes. And to be honest, ours is fairly simple to try to fit in.
Okay, that was my question, is like, are the plans the common denominator between the 3 jurisdictions?
Yeah, the 2 things, the plans are the common denominator, and also the plans are already basically pre-approved. So the idea is that you have everything approved from the building and the planning side, aside from obviously where you place the box on the site. So the intent is really to get as much of the process out of the way up front.
Okay. Any questions from other council members?
No, I'm excited that we're going in this direction.
Okay. Well, I think we probably need to do 2 separate motions just to make it clear, because it's 2 agenda items. But for the first one, the recommended action is that we place the service provider agreement with the Artisans Group for the update of the ADU plans on the June 17th, 2025 City Council consent calendar, with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. If there's a motion.
John moved, I'll second.
Okay. It's a motion by Councilmember Cathy and seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Thank you. And I guess we can go ahead and go to our second one, since we did the briefing on both these items, agenda item number 5. I would entertain a motion that we place the ILA with Lacey, Olympia, and Yelm for the updated ADU plans on the June 17th, 2025 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Donovan, seconded by Councilmember Kathy. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Great. Moving right along to our 2025 comp plan update regarding the conservation element. Dana, I think you might help us with this one. Is it Dana or
Yes.
Dana? I always forget because I work with a Dana.
It's Dana.
Dana.
Oh my
okay,
gosh.
I
No, I'm
apologize.
so sorry. I'm getting very confused myself. Yeah, I pronounce my name Dana.
So I was right for the first month and
Oh.
a half you worked here?
No,
I was right too, but I was guessing, so does it count? Probably not.
easy way to remember if you like. I don't mind. My childhood nickname was Dana Banana. So if that helps you remember, I love it.
That's also how I remember my coworkers as Dana Banana.
Yeah. So good morning. Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much. My name is Dana Bowers. I'm an associate planner at City of Tumwater, and I'm here this morning to review with you the conservation element. We're so excited that we have it available and in draft format so that we can get your ideas. And I want to be pretty brief so that we can have some more time for your discussions, because that's really the purpose. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation for you. Can everyone see my presentation?
It is loading. There we go. Looks great.
Wonderful. Great. So I just want to briefly touch on the format because we have a part 1 and a part 2. So we'll talk about that. We also want to discuss the actual content to give you some background for what the conservation element actually covers. Then I'd like to take your feedback on the goals and policies and draft implementation actions, and then we'll talk about what we're doing next. So part 1, as you've seen in a couple of other reviews of chapters now, is going to actually be that very accessible document that contains tables of goals, policies, and actions. So chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 really lay out the legal framework for the chapter and why we have to do it. And then chapter 4 is going to be the goals and policies, and we've separated out in Appendix A draft implementation items so that we can move those implementation items into work programs for council review and approval. And we wanted to make sure that they were draft document so that we are always considering council's feedback on that and prioritizing as council would prioritize. So part 2 is the technical information, and I really consider this the best available science piece, especially where it comes to this chapter that talks about why we made the decisions we made in assigning the policies. So we have divided it into a couple of different sections. So in terms of conservation, our real purpose is to protect the function and the values of our natural spaces. And so, when we're thinking about that larger idea, we, have some guidance and the things we have to do from the state. I don't want to say regulations. They're required. There we go. Required items. Another R word. So chapter 2 covers the natural resources pieces, and it just identifies areas of long-term commercial significance in natural resources, and then decides how we're going to utilize those and protect them. And then chapter 3 is critical areas. So we can talk about the 5 critical areas when we get through to that chapter. But then again, preserving those functions is the key there. And then we have some appendix documents that give you some more information about how that's done in those subsections. So moving right along, we have natural resources, and the GMA goal really controls sprawl and keeps that urban growth and urban development in terms of housing and economic development into the city center. So I really want to focus this conversation on the fact that this is, GMA wants us to develop in our urban spaces, including the UGA. That's why we have set aside the UGA. And so we're accepting that development so that our neighbor county jurisdiction can have long-term significant commercial ag, forestry, mining, those kind of operations. So not to say that we don't have that, but I wanted to frame it in that context because what we really want to focus on is urban agriculture. We have ways to grow and ways to provide food for our community, but it's at a very different scale and it's at a community level scale. So we just wanted to kind of focus on that. So when it comes to ag, one of the big pieces I wanted to think about is soil, because soil really dictates, what is going to grow on the land. Go ahead, Leatta.
Thank
Councilmember
you.
Doloff.
No, just call me Lana, please. I don't like titles. When I'm hearing urban agriculture, I'm trying to put my mind around. So where does Kersop Farms fit into that? Do we consider that urban agriculture, or and the opposite of urban is rural agriculture? Where do our current farms fit into this definition?
So I would say that urban agriculture is anything under 30 acres. So that's can be a pretty big farm, but I think it kind of depends. I know some of our farmland is within city limits, but also contains farmland outside of city limits. So it may be subject to our further defining.
Got it. Thanks, Dana.
You're welcome. So about soils, 7% of our entire city and UGA area is prime farmland, and it is I'll have to double check where it's located, but I believe it is some of the farmland that you're talking about. So only 7% is that prime farmland. Conversely, 70% is prime, but only if drained or if irrigated. And so when we think about what that means to drain or irrigate soils for farmland, it means that we're prioritizing agriculture over maybe wildlands and wetlands and things like that. So we want to be careful that we're, just recognizing the different goals that we have. And then for irrigating, we have water availability concerns that we want to track with that. So just kind of balancing those things. I wanted to bring up that point. All right, so moving on to forest lands, we want to recognize that we have a similar thing going on with forest lands where we have, when we identify the long-term commercial significant forest lands, there are like 371 acres. It's like 0.05% of our land area. So not very much farmland or not very much forestry land, and it is kind of around the outskirts in the UGA. And those are protected under a designation for at the state level. Go ahead, Commissioner Althauser. Oh,
When you say
Councilman.
like forestry lands, that's like lands where timber is a product that is being harvested as opposed to just something like tree cover in an urban area. Is that right?
Absolutely. So those lands must be kept in commercial harvest
Okay, got it.
in order to maintain their their lower tax status.
Okay, thanks.
So, and that harvest cycle can be long. It can be 50 or, even longer years. So the management practices aren't necessarily in question. It's like what the intent is, and the intent is commercial harvest. All right, so that's how many acres we have of that. And we also have our local tree protections, right? So again, we're talking about urban forest versus our commercial forest land. So dialing it more into urban forests, we have our 1224, which is our street tree ordinance. We have 1608, which is our tree protections, tree and vegetation protections. And we have 1847, which is our landscaping code. Yes, Councilmember Kathy?
Yes, I wanted to ask about under this urban forestry management plan, I guess, is the tree ordinance. Can you tell me where we are on that and the changes possibly we're headed toward, I hope?
Absolutely. because we're still, really in the thick of making sure the comprehensive plan is complete, we are just wrapping up a couple of the chapters on that and getting the development code out the door. And then I think we plan to be done that by September. And so then we can pull up that the tree protection ordinance and start working on that. Brad and I spoke the other day about what the plans are for that. And we want to make sure that our new manager is aware that, and leading and organizing that effort. So I think as we onboard that new person, then we'll take some direction and see how they want to organize, because we have really 3 parts, and how they should go together is kind of what we're looking to them for. All right, so
it seems like we're setting up a lot of different things without making any changes to that ordinance. So I just don't want to get all the way through a lot of this stuff and not have established our tree ordinance, because we have some issues there, I think, and I don't know how some I know overlap and some may need to be really changed. So
yeah,
yeah,
I believe that the council, is really concerned about that, and those are things that do get added and included in the urban forestry or an urban forest management plan and the forest part by reference to the urban forest management plan and by reference to the different goals and policies, like the fact that we want to keep canopy and that we have canopy goals. We're pointing to those and making sure that our actions are leading to achieving those canopy goals. And so, the comp plan gets developed, and then we develop the code out of that larger goal. And so forgive me, and please correct me if my understanding is wrong, but we want to set that intention first in the goals, and then create those changes. And we are changing code all the time, not just as a reflection of the comp plan, but the comp plan really kind of pushes and is the impetus for those changes in a lot of cases. And I believe this is, the comp plan is providing that framework and support for these changes as well.
well, we've had a tree ordinance for many years here that is, I feel, definitely outdated, and it is not as much about the canopy as it is about cutting down trees for development. And we're, find out good, we can build 5 new houses on a property, but we're going to take down 23 trees. Well, and I know some of that, I'm sure, is in some code or something, but we need to look at this again very seriously, I think.
Yeah, Joan, I would encourage, this is kind of our opportunity where, like, the conservation element we've had in comp plans for 20 or 30 or I don't even know how many decades. But if there are goals or strategies listed in here that you think should be strengthened in support of that vision, I think this is the document by which we have an opportunity to strengthen those goals. So I'd encourage you
Absolutely.
for us to take like a deep dive into what's listed in here in the draft. And if you have feedback for ways it should be improved, this is our bite at the apple to try to make those changes. Because if historically, we've had this element and more changes need to be made, or if you're not sort of seeing it on the ground in the way that you'd like, or is the goal, then this is our chance to make those changes.
In which of the, you're just saying in general under forest lands, or in this?
I'm talking about this whole element. There's goals and strategies in the draft, and we have an opportunity here in this committee to shape what that looks like, to send feedback and edits and things like that before it goes to the full council, before it's adopted as part of our long-term plan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to take any comments or, chat with you on the phone or however you want to talk further about that. That'd be great.
Thank you.
No worries. So we also have quite a few different local policies that tie into forestry, like critical areas ordinance, our endangered species list, that we that we that we manage under the critical areas ordinance, and the HCP as soon as it's ready to go. It's these protections are tied to land use and design regulations in some cases, and then we have sub area plans that also call for tree protections. So we have a few different things and mechanisms to do that. So mineral land resources, I wanted to just provide a little context because it's not like we're mining copper in the city of Tumwater. We are mining aggregate, which is gravels and rocks. And in our built landscape, it's everywhere. You need that aggregate resource from a local source because if you don't have it locally, you have to truck it in. And those transportation costs are astronomical because that material is so heavy. So we want to make sure that we do have that resource as we're thinking about how we build houses in our community, how we put in new roads and maintain our roads. Those critical pieces of infrastructure need this resource. And we only allow it in the heavy industrial area because we want to make sure that we're also protecting the community and our natural areas from some of the things that the impacts that happen as a result of, pulling rocks out of the earth, dust and noise and those kind of things. So we have a section for that. I want to also just draw upon the fact that, the comprehensive plan, this element works together with urban forest management plan, with the hazard mitigation plan, and then development code, kind of as we discussed a little bit earlier with the forestry, like they work together in concert, and that development code really implements the larger ideas that are in the comprehensive plan. All right. So getting a little bit into critical areas now. As I said before, we really focused on the function and preserving functions of our landscape. So especially when that comes to, wetlands and geohazards, and we want to keep vegetation, particularly on slopes, and making sure that we have trees available for our wetlands and for water attenuation for flooding hazards. So they're very intermingled as well. So we do our best to kind of separate things out, but recognizing that we do have a lot of interplay. Councilmember Delhaff?
Thank you, Dana. The one question I have is, this is a current element we have, and one example, and I'm wondering if one of you can help me understand. On Kersop Road, when you're going on Kersop Road, there was a wetland, a continuous wetland, and now it was clear cut and there's a development, that wetland was cut off. How does that example happen when we have this conservation element? Like, help me understand how those two align.
Right. So the wetland, so the critical areas ordinance was updated, I believe, in 2019. And so some of the development we're seeing now was permitted prior to that update. And so when we have some of our permits being approved, and then we have expiration dates and things like that. So we are not always seeing on the ground what's approved in our code right now. And so I think that has something to do with it. And then also it is part of that conversation about protecting the function of those areas. And in some cases, preserving the highest function area and enhancing those areas is part of the goal. And I think Brad popped on because he might have some more to say about this. So I'm gonna step back and allow him.
Yeah, so thank you, Dana, and thank you for the question. It's important to understand that the conservation element and the critical areas ordinance are in sync when protecting those resources within the city. The kind of development that you're seeing on Kersop was approved under our current code, our current regulations. And the important thing is those regulations are based on state models that were reviewed by Department of Ecology. There are elements in there The important thing is we're not doing anything that's contrary to what best available science is for protecting resources. One of the things that we have done on the conservation side is the important part about that is protecting those resources, those critical areas as required by state law. Cities have the ability to have a balancing act. They can make a choice to say that we want to extend those particular protections in a greater way. We can do that. Now, at the same time, we need to be mindful of the impacts of what happens when we do that to other requirements that we have from the state, that whether we're dealing with housing, whether we're dealing with accommodating growth and so forth. So we have the basic things that the state requires us to do that we are currently meeting, both within the code and within the conservation element. And then we have the potential for greater protections, being mindful of what that means in terms of trying to meet our other goals and addressing those things. It is an ongoing thing as part of updating these codes as additional science becomes available, as additional understanding of resources becomes available. So when we last updated our regulations in 2019 to reflect state guidance, that was because the state had a better understanding from when they originally, I mean, this has been an ongoing thing since the 1990s in terms of sort of an evolution of what is important to protect as part of critical areas, and whether we're talking wetlands or steep slopes or habitat. So what we're trying to do is we meet the minimum state requirements, and then we also try to make sure that we try to balance all these other things within an urban area.
Yeah, thank you, Brad, for that background. The challenge I have is I'm a big fan of this element and I love how it's worded and it doesn't align with what I'm seeing happening, right? And I get what's happening and I get where we're meeting the laws and I understand all of that. It doesn't align for me. When we say protect, well, there's caveats, right? And I get that. So how do we frame that to set expectations with our community of that balancing act? I feel like there needs to be more of a discussion of that or more upfront because this element doesn't align with the comments and questions I get from people driving around going, wait, you say this, but why are we seeing this, right? To understand that better. That's where I'm at. There's a
Yeah,
disconnect.
I think it's important, number one, that we have a greater conversation about what it means to protect and what we are doing and how it aligns with our requirements. I think one of the more important things that we probably should be moving the conversation in the direction of is how do we enhance, which is the second new part for the GMA goal for this area. And I think when we start to talk about enhancement, that gives us, I think, a greater ability to, I want to say, greater bang for our buck in the small area for critical areas. So if we have wetland functions that we just say we're just going to protect them as is, you know, you don't just stay away from it, but that those wetlands are degraded to begin with, so their value is not very good in terms of habitat and water protection and so forth. Just by protecting alone, I think if we can focus also on what the city could be doing to work with landowners to help enhance those areas, so we get greater habitat value, greater protection for resources in those particular areas. I think it's really a conversation of how we use our limited urban lands in all the ways that we are told we need to do. That's how I see the argument being framed. It's difficult to see things change also. There's an expectation that things won't change and that things, whatever you see on the ground is what is going to be in the next 20 years. That isn't necessarily the case. So we just need to be thinking about that conversation.
Thank you, Brad. I agree with you. And yes, further discussion. Thank you so much.
Now, I'd like to further discuss that also, because I didn't come home or get finished with council last night and read this whole thing like Leetta has, but I read this about the wetlands because I'm concerned about them also. And by the time I got done reading it, with all the exceptions and possibilities and this is and that's and the other, I thought to myself, we're gonna have a hard time protecting wetlands because there's seem to be exceptions or you know, something to too many things in them. And I don't know if I understood it all properly, but this conversation is helpful. And I would also like to join in a further conversation about the enhancement as well as the protection of
I-
wetlands.
Also, I just want to let you know, I'm in the process of drafting another email to the council, similar to what I did last week with the housing element. So you should be seeing the conservation element in your packet folders today.
Oh,
So in a similar fashion for the housing element last night, you could use the Word documents, whatever you need to do or set up a time to discuss. Just want to let you know about that.
you did that after council, huh?
Thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, I look forward to further discussion on these pieces because it will just help us strengthen and help the community understand and help us understand what the community
Yeah.
needs. So one of the next pieces is critical aquifer recharge areas, and that has to do with our drinking water and our wellhead protection areas. So I encourage you to dig into that if you'd like. We have, my apologies, my slide is not moving forward. There we go. So how we classify those and how we concern those, I wanted to definitely touch on, you'll see some concentric circles around our wellheads, and they refer to, they refer to the time it takes for one drop of water to travel toward the well. So they're 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. I just thought that was an important piece to understand about those, how we classify that. So for frequently flooded areas, there's a FEMA guidance on how we classify and how we protect those areas. And I think, following that guidance is what we've done so far, but then also going, and adopting low impact development strategies and making sure that we have within the floodplain area that we are only allowing low impact development, so less pavement, more green. So we have that absorption, and we have, as we have flooding, we are also protecting the infrastructure that's not there from being destroyed, but we're also protecting the waterways from additional runoff and additional, just making it easier for absorption and by not having all that grayscape. All right. Moving on, geologically hazardous areas. So we have development regs for, my slides just keep advancing on me, I apologize. So we have the, definitely looking at our hazard areas in terms of the slopes that we have and making sure that we're applying appropriate density in those areas, if density at all, and land use. So in some cases, it's not appropriate to have any land use on certain slopes based on their, I think there are 2 categories, the angle of slope and then the soils. And so just using, again, that best available science to say what is going to protect people and protect infrastructure, and then protect our landscape from even erosion on that scale. So next one. We have fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. And so I really wanted to focus on the fact that this protects habitats and not individuals, so that we are protecting areas and not just, So our HCP is moving forward to help us with this endeavor so that we have our listed species, and then we can still allow and have that balance of development that's happening and protections for protected areas for the species that are listed. We also have critical areas ordinance that has buffer areas and has certain species, all the listed species called out, and we are to, manage around the critical areas for our development. And then also, if absolutely needed, we have the conditional use permits. So I think all that kind of works together. And that is fish, wildlife, and also vegetation. So we have protections for some of our important trees in the area. Moving on. So the overarching environment goals. So now we're actually going to get into the goals and policies themselves. I'd like to just briefly go over some highlights, and then if you have any comments right now, I'm standing by to take comments now. And then if you kind of think around things and want to talk later, then that's fine too. But the things I'd like you to keep in mind are, we're taking comments about timeline. If you think timelines need to shift as you're digging into this, the tables. If you think, if you see unintended consequences you'd like to call out, anyone or anything in this plan that's being left out that you'd like to see included, and then any impacts to you or anything you care about, and then what are they? Do you see anything being impacted? And really, any additional thoughts, we're happy to hear them and consider them as we move forward. So goal C1 is really about recognizing that nature is significant and has features, functions, and systems that determine our quality of life and the livability of Tumwater. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our community livable environmentally, and it's clean and safe for people, and that we're protecting those functions and values, and that we're using adopted plans, because the plans, really do have that best available science lens and pull that information. So that's goal C1. Goal C2 is to promote the conservation of natural resources and protect the protection of the environment in cooperation with residents, property owners, jurisdictions, and tribes. So making sure that we're really having a larger conversation when we talk about how we're protecting things. And so talking with the county and talking with our neighborhood jurisdictions, and in some cases, we have some regional interest groups. Deschutes River has some interest groups, and South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group, that kind of thing. So working with those different folks, and a lot of that looks like supporting education programs. Go ahead, Commissioner or Councilmember Dalhoff.
Lieta, thank you, Dana. So another scenario. So say down the road we have another historic element or something that has listed or preserved older. I'm not saying a tree, but what if it was a tree, right? Like how, as we move forward, to not have what happened again, how does this plan help us move forward for those scenarios where something does come up and we need to figure out what to do?
That is a great question. I think in terms of things that are listed and things that are called out, it's a matter of, what does it look like as we're getting into the development code, because the development code really is the implementation. And we do look back, regularly. It's part of the reason we called out these goals and policies, so that we can review and look back into, like, what was the intent? What is the goal? What is the purpose of that? So maybe simply in that we separated these things out, so this is more accessible and something, a document that we can use on a regular basis to review and to call back into any situation that could happen. Say, okay, but what did we agree upon? What is
Right.
And not to say that that didn't happen, because I wasn't here and I don't know, but that it's certainly more accessible now. So that's one step. I don't know if Brad has more to add on that.
I was like, is he going to stay off video? No, there he is.
No, I'm trying my best to balance addressing the council's need in the meeting as well as on the workplace. That didn't even sound right. I think, yeah, what Dana had said is in line with what we have. Again, the conservation element gives us the framework, the policy background to sort of deal with the issues that come up, whether we're talking about a tree issue, or we're talking, say, if another animal or vegetation is listed, either state or federally listed species. There's a framework in here that helps us address that. It doesn't necessarily anticipate every potential outcome, but it gives us the framework for us to sort of figure out how to react to that and how to address those things. So
thank you. I mean, like in our packets, we talk about the agenda items align with our strategic goals and priorities. Do we ever actually go back, like when say the current instance, I don't ever remember going, hey, we have a conservation element. Like, how do we start actually implementing these as we move forward, right? Instead of just, oh, every 10 years we have to update it, and then everyone's stressed out, planning commission, all of us, we have to review, and you all have to do thousands of pages. How do we weave this into our work as we move forward?
I think that's really part of the current strategic planning purpose, is to start that particular process, to make that connection between not only the conservation element, but the housing element, the land use and transportation more visible, more, more a part of your strategic planning process, so that there's a clearer and a directer connection between the two. And more importantly, there's also some built-in, how are we doing as we're going through the process. The state has mandated that we have some additional reporting requirements every 5 years or so. I think it's also really important for us as a city to be building that into our larger processes, to say, how are we actually accomplishing what we said we wanted to do, since this plan is truly our plan for addressing new development and that kind of thing.
I dig it. Thank you.
Great question, Leetta. Thank you. All right, we're moving forward. So natural resource area goals. So support urban agriculture and access to local food production. And I wanted to call out specifically that we have a food systems plan that's in development, and that some of the goals and policies that are developed through that research and that study will be pulled into this element. So we're excited about that. They're not quite ready yet, probably not until September. So it might be kind of a reference by reference until we know that they're ready and that the council has approved them. So just making sure the ag is viable at the scale that we can, and then supporting how people get local food are some of the goals. In terms of urban forestry, canopy retention is one of our biggest goals. It feeds into what the climate element also discusses, and then just making sure that we're compatible with surrounding development pattern. I think you guys have been through a lot of those discussions with WUI and with some of the tree code updates, but I think it's important to have that balance, but also recognize where our priorities are. So mineral resource lands. So where we have extraction, we're not going to cause degradation because we have surface, or we have erosion control practices, and then making sure those are in place. Then protecting from incompatible uses and making sure we have buffers and screening, and then restoration after a site has been extracted. Just going to pause for a minute after those three goals and see if there's any questions. I know we're kind of going at a very high level and you're not seeing all the policies and goals. So as we dive into the critical areas, goals, and highlights, we're designating the critical, designating and protecting critical areas in accordance with the Growth Management Act. And it's about safeguarding from threats for public safety and safeguarding the functions. Go ahead, Erica.
Hey, thank you, Dana. My name is Erica Smith Erickson. I also helped work on the conservation element in the critical areas. And based on previous discussions that we had regarding wetlands, I did kind of want to point out that under this goal is where we staff made a draft implementation action to address some of those wetland concerns. The state requirements currently under the checklist don't actually require that we enhance, but there are like optional things we can do, like enhancement. But based on internal stakeholder feedback from our different departments, we realize there's a need or maybe a want for an on-staff biologist to help us review some of these wetland reports to ensure that there's no net loss of function, and then make sure that the enhancement, when we do mitigation, that it's functioning properly and that we have some sort of monitoring in place. while we're talking about balancing development with protection and ongoing functions of our critical areas. I think that would be a solution for us to balance the goals, like Brad was saying, with development within the city. So I wanted to kind of highlight this goal just to let you guys know that we do have draft implementation actions, and there are discussions about how do we balance development with protection, and that was one of the solutions identified.
Thank you, Erica. Leetta, do you have a question
Yeah.
or comment?
I know Michael and I have to leave at night, but Eric, I appreciate that background. The one thing I have just for future to help understand better when we talk about that net that Erica was talking about, but also I'm wondering about location in the city. So the example I have is with what's with the county right now with the urban growth land swap, right? For down on 99 on 93rd, and the property that Tumwater has proposed has wetlands in it. So why would we offer to swap land that has wetlands? It's one of the ongoing questions I have is if we talk about protection, why would we swap that land and give it away? Just so with these goals, the question I have is also location in the city, besides just balancing a net loss, but the location in, does that make sense? I see Brad and Erica at the same time.
Yeah. I think given that the land swap is still sort of in process and it's still a hypothetical, I think the general idea behind the state swap law, and this is on a broader level, is that if there are areas within the urban area, within our UGA, that aren't really developable to urban levels, they have steep slopes, wetlands, or critical habitat for a protected species, for example, those areas would be considered to be taken out of our urban growth area and the expectation they develop to urban levels and moved into the county where they can have higher protection, and more importantly, they wouldn't have the development pressure to develop on those areas in exchange for lands that are more appropriate for the urban level of development. They don't have the level of critical areas and so forth. So that's really the intent behind the swap law from the state perspective, is just to ensure that whatever's within our urban growth area is something that could be developable. And we're not putting things in there that aren't developable and could be potentially at risk if we, develop in urban levels next to those kinds of things.
I would also just like to mention that until we get a formal delineation, we don't quite necessarily know the extent or the size of the wetland as well. So that is usually through a land use review that we would get those reports to review. And that would kind of determine the buildable lands on the specific parcels and properties. We do have geodata that has, it's a good idea or indicator of wetlands, but it's not survey accurate.
Yeah, I guess before Jenkins, for me, it's the optics. We have an element, we talk about preservation, we talk about protecting it, and then we're just going to give it to the county. Actually, we don't want it in Tumwater anymore. Just the optics of that. I just would like to pursue that more when we get the guidelines from Commerce about what type of lands you can actually swap.
Yeah, I think the important thing to understand is number one, that the counties has the ability to have greater protections, and more importantly, their level of development, for example, instead of saying putting 6 dwelling units on an acre adjacent to in a critical area, they are 1 per 5 acres. So the adjacency of the land uses plays a role in that and how those parcels may or may not develop. The critical area protections, for the most part, are very similar. In some cases, the counties are a little bit stronger than ours, but also because they're dealing with a situation where they can be a little stronger. And again, that's jurisdictional choice, but they can be stronger because they're not required to develop to the urban level like we are.
And Leetta, I'm going to propose that we maybe put this one in the parking lot in the interest of time so that we can, how many more slides do we have on this one? We might have to come back to this to make sure that we can get to the agreement on our agenda for the specialized recreation, because that's supposed to be on our calendar next week for council. So I wonder if we might have to put a pin in this item and come back to it at our next GGC meeting if we have a lot of content left to get through.
We have 9 more goals. So at a pretty high level.
I would suggest we add this to your next GGC schedule to continue this discussion.
Yeah,
And,
would that be
also-
okay, Dana?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We just want to see you again because you're a great presenter.
Also, I just want to let the council know that all of this has been uploaded to your council packet in Word format, along with a similar set of questions that we have for the housing element. So if you want to use that ahead of the next GGC meeting to prep, that would be a good suggestion.
Could
Why
I,
don't we plan on that?
could I ask for a definition of one word before about this? So
Yes.
I have in my head as I go back over this. What do we consider a wetland buffer? What is a buffer? Because I also read that we can in some cases develop on it. Am I right there in the reading?
The wetland buffers, the intent of that is really to establish an area adjacent to a resource, whether it's a critical area like a steep slope or a wetland or so forth, that would keep development farther away from the actual critical area. Depending upon the habitat quality of the wetlands and the type of wetland it is, there's a range of buffers that are presented. If, for example, the large wetland complex that you on the west side of the city, that's probably in the higher classification, requires bigger buffers and all of that. There are options for developing in portions of the buffer, but only if the wetland functions remain unchanged. And typically when that occurs, there's a lot more enhancement that becomes part of the process. If you just follow the typical regulations to say we have a wetland, we've got a 100-foot buffer as an example, there's no enhancement, there's no, nothing to change the condition of the existing wetland. If they are reducing the buffer, they have to enhance the quality of the wetland and the buffer in order to do that. So ultimately there's the same result at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Okay. With that, why don't we put a pin in this one? We'll come back to it at our next GGC meeting. I think we council members have some homework assignments to do in the meantime too, in terms of reading the element and preparing for a discussion. But this was a really great discussion. Thank you for your presentation, Dana. So I'll move us ahead on the agenda to the agreement with Thurston County for specialized recreation. I think Todd, you're going to help us with this one.
Yeah, I'll be quick. And mainly to answer any questions you guys might have, but we do, Thurston County provides specialized recreation. And Olympia, Lacey, and us, we have an agreement with them. We've been doing it for about 3 decades now, where each city pays Thurston County to operate recreational services for people with disabilities. They include day trips, monthly events. They do dances, movie nights, and then fitness programming throughout the year. So our portion as the city of Tomar is pretty minimal. It's just over $2,000, $2,125 a year. And this is a 2-year agreement. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have. It's a great program. I used to work for Thurston County Parks and Rec a long time ago and be part of it. And to see the people's faces as they are doing these dances or bowling nights or taking a day trip, it's a great thing. So happy to answer any questions you might have about the agreement or what services are offered.
Great, thanks. Did any folks have any questions about the agreement?
I'm in full support.
I am too.
Great. Well, I don't have any questions either. This one's pretty straightforward. It's a great program. So I would entertain a motion that we place the ILA between Tumwater and Thurston County for specialized recreation services on the June 17th, 2025 council consent calendar with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Kathy, seconded by Councilmember Doff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, motion passes. So that takes us to the end of our substantive agenda, but I did want to have a discussion about meeting times. This committee used to meet, I think at 11 a.m. on Wednesdays, and we switched it to 8 a.m. in part to accommodate my schedule in particular, which for the duration of the rest of my tenure on council is a little bit different because it's interim now and I have more flexibility. I know that some folks would appreciate meeting at a later time in the day because that's a little bit easier. So I guess in the 5 minutes we have left, wanted to just sort of chat to see if folks are interested in changing the meeting time. Are you interested in keeping it the same? If you're interested in changing it, we should probably just take that offline and maybe do a doodle poll so we can make sure that the time is also mutually workable for staff to make sure that that works. But I did want to open up the forum to see if folks wanted to change the meeting time.
Brad has his hand up first.
Go ahead.
I feel like the fourth member of the GGC here.
I mean, you are.
Just wanted to point out, Wednesdays from 10 until noon are our management team meetings. So our availability for the GGC will be potentially limited after we go at 11. Just want to have you to consider that as part of your discussions.
I can't do 11 because I have a standard meeting for my other job.
Yeah.
So I could do noon. I mean, really, if we could just have staff go nonstop all day with no breaks, I think that would be really productive for everyone.
Yeah, and I'd be.
I don't want them to go
reticent-
10 to noon and then we're like, let's do GGC for their
I mean, I'd be
lunch.
reticent to do noon because that's when staff have lunch.
I mean, you don't want me hangry either. I mean, that's a bad combo.
Yeah. So if what I'm hearing, Leota, is that you are open to a later meeting time.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And Joan, how do you want to keep this time the same? Would you also appreciate a different meeting time?
Yeah, Joan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it doesn't have to be at noon or whatever. I mean, somewhere.
Just not 8.
Yeah, 10 o'clock. Well, yeah, 10 o'clock.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't I get talk to Lisa and Debbie and Brad about getting an email thread and a doodle poll going so we can try to see what works for us as well as what would work for staff. If that sounds good to both of you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, I dig it.
Cool. Awesome. That takes us to the end of our agenda. If there's nothing else, I believe we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.